The Nintendo Gamecube controller. It is a wonderful piece of technology, and I truly believe that it is one of the best controllers of all time in terms of 3D gaming. I find this button layout to be particularly innovative in terms of 3D game design, but one of the most valuable pieces of equipment that Nintendo designed during this era was the Game Boy Player, designed to play Game Boy games on the Gamecube on a larger screen. Now, most people only have played it with this controller, which is not ideal due to this small D-pad, which can be kind of difficult to use if you have larger hands, but also these shoulder buttons, being as analog as they are, is also not ideal. However, during the 2000s, Hori came out with a solution. For those who don't know, Hori is a company that designs third-party controllers, but works closely with the companies for whom they're designing these controllers for. They are known for high quality and almost first-party levels of build materials. So, this was released sometime in the 2000s, sort of specifically for the Game Boy Player. It was made to eliminate the problem of the small D-pad. And while it is an excellent controller, sadly these days it has become highly sought after and very expensive. So, I'm going to go over everything you need to know before you purchase one of these and try to help you decide if they are worth the cost. Here we have the Hori Gamecube pad. So here's everything you need to know right off the bat. Number one, it still uses the rather unique face button shape of the standard GameCube controller. However, I don't find it to be a problem. These are the main two buttons you're going to be using most of the time. When they designed this controller, they switched the position of the Z button from being a shoulder button to a face button, but they moved it into a position that's very separated from the standard face buttons, which is nice because when using the Game Boy Player, this button is only used to bring up a menu. So having easier access to it is pretty nice, not to mention the fact that it's out of the way pretty much constantly. Another thing you need to know about this controller, as you can see from this side view, is that they have added these sort of grips, which in my opinion is probably the most contentious thing about this controller. They're not bad per se, but in my honest opinion, I think that I would consider it a negative of this controller. I actually wish that they stuck closer to a more traditional Super Nintendo style design, just flat around the back. I find that to be a little bit more comfortable, but it is worth mentioning that it is by no means a deal breaker to me. This controller is still extremely comfortable, and it's definitely on par with something that Nintendo themselves would make. Another thing worth noting is that this D-pad is incredible. It is one of the best D-pads I've ever used. I actually think it might be of higher quality than the actual Super Nintendo D-pad, and it's definitely higher quality than pretty much any D-pad Nintendo has developed since the Wii era. So that is definitely worth knowing. The shoulder buttons on this controller They are exactly the same or very similar to Super Nintendo shoulder buttons. However, it feels that these are a lot tighter. Now, this might also be worth mentioning, but as somebody that speedruns Super Nintendo games, shoulder buttons are always the first ones to go out for me, particularly because of a technique called shoulder pumping in Super Metroid. Almost always the right shoulder button on Super Nintendo style controllers goes out pretty fast for me. But these feel like they changed the original design slightly. I actually see this controller having more longevity than the Super Nintendo controller would. And also, these start and select buttons have been changed to be more like Super Nintendo style buttons. Now, of note, the original GameCube controller did not have a select button. So, when it comes to the Game Boy Player, these buttons actually function as select. So essentially you have 3 select buttons right here. So I could see this controller being used for any sort of 2D game that you might find on the GameCube. I am currently unaware of any that would be played, but for most standard uses of this controller, particularly the Game Boy Player, you have 3 options to press select. So I guess the main question is it worth the money? Now, I think that this is a question that will have a lot of different answers depending on who you ask. Now, here is how I would put it. I consider this controller to be probably the definitive way to play Game Boy Advance games. The quality is just excellent. The feeling of holding one of these controllers is at least an 8 out of 10. And the biggest knock against it, in my opinion, is these grips. So I believe that it comes down to personal preference. I think that if you have the expendable money to afford one of these controllers, which sadly they're going for as much as like $200 now, I think that it's worth it. If you would have to like work extra hours at work, all of these things to afford one of these, I don't think that it's worth it at all. So I think that a good alternative to one of these would be a Super Nintendo controller adapter for GameCube. I think that you would get about the same results. And that's honestly substantially cheaper. So, I don't know. I personally feel that this controller is worth it if you have the money, but don't sell your firstborn child to get it. But beyond that, thank you for watching, and if you're interested in more gaming content, feel free to subscribe. Thanks, and have a great day.